All right. So this week we're talking all about land, just the history of land, then the institutions surrounding land. Okay. So in the pre-industrial world, this is the major form of wealth. Actually, for many I guess for many Americans, it's the principal form of wealth now. But I mean, this is basically the main asset in an agricultural economy. And most people were farmers, 90% in 1800, but down to 3%. So, I mean, back then it was very much like this is, what everyone does. They farm the land. Now, the US has ample land initially, at least in the north. The existing population is, either sparse when they get there or diminished by disease. We don't exactly know. Like a lot of these indigenous populations in the Americas, we're not exactly sure the extent of them prior to European contact because of the disease. We just don't know how devastating. We know that the diseases were devastating. We just don't know the extent of the devastation. All right. And so the Jeffersonian ideal, like very in the very, very beginning, Jefferson's vision of the US is one of small scale farming. Like everybody has their own plot of land. Like he thought this is the best way to ensure democracy. Freedom is like just each person has their own plot, or each household has their own plot of land. Um, and they're all doing farming. Like this was his idealized version of the US. Okay. And then lastly, just like this acquiring of land is basically how societies get wealthy before the industrial revolution, and is that this is why every king essentially has the same policy, get land or die trying, like expand the empire, expand the land, because this is how I get wealthier. Okay, now as we know, all that changes post industrial revolution, but this is kind of at the onset of the initial colonies, and even post revolution, like this is the idea: we are acquiring land to have this small scale farming. This is how we're going to do democracy. All right, here's how your initial colonies in the Americas. You have the English over here. This is French initially. Your Spanish through what present day Latin America. All right, now initially there is this critical evolution from communal farming to private property that really increases yields. And so most European farming and most pre-industrial farming is communal farming. All right, this is what's called the open field system. Basically, these are all held in common. There's like, some sort of lord that takes a cut of the land. All of this is, each person kind of has areas they're responsible for, but the yield is shared at the community level. All right, and so many of the initial colonies kind of follow this system. All right, so and it's kind of weird because they're actually like working for a company here, and so it's communal, but it's like under the auspice of a corporation. And again, like the yields are low, and there's a very high rates of mortality. This initial the Plymouth colony has an similar conditions where they have a communal system, and the food's distributed equally, and there's just low yields and starvation, high mortality. Okay. And so this is the issue of incentives. This is your institutional structure creates certain incentives. So we have communal land or land owned by the company. And here, there's not a lot of incentive when you have this sort of situation. There's not a lot of incentive to work the land to the utmost of your ability, kind of just by this simple math equation. If there's 5 workers working together, producing 100 bushels, each person gets 20 bushels then, if we're splitting that evenly. Now, if I just decide to shirk, and if I just don't work as hard, the overall output is lower to 90, but I'm still going to get 18. So even though, let's say I reduce my effort by half, and so there's 10 less bushels, I only lose 2. So there's this incentive to shirk. So even though, the ideal here is good, hey, we're all going to share equally, oftentimes, and actually we see this, we can observe through history, a switch from communal to private property, we can, in every case that I'm familiar with, yields go up tremendously. And it's sort of because of this shirking issue. Um, There's I was just reading a article by a guy who was raised on a kibbutz. A kibbutz is like communal farming in Israel, and he said basically it's good. It's a good situation if you're a saint or a freeloader. If you're a saint, you work hard, you don't really mind that sharing your stuff. If you're a freeloader, you like it because you don't have to work and you get the stuff. He says for everyone else, it's not really an ideal system, because of the shirking and essentially the lower output. And so if we go back here, this open field system has much lower outputs than a private property system. And we'll see that there's actually a recent paper kind of looking at that switch to private property in England really is the um, institutional innovation that leads to higher yields. Okay. All right. And so the colonists basically figure this out on their own. They're like, hey, let's switch to private property. People have their own plots. We'll, and we will, they'll, if you grow something, you get to keep it. And Bradford has this quote that, this really improved the outcomes. Okay. And so we get family farms throughout New England and the middle colonies where we have like these small family farms where the people there own the farm, they own the crops, and if they have a little left over, they can sell it at the market. Now, as I mentioned, England undergoes this transformation around this time period as well, where they switch from common fields to enclosures. And there's this paper actually this year that just came. Actually, it's not out. It's not even out yet. It's just a draft. Suggests that this had a really, really large impact on yields. The yields really went up. And in one of the podcasts I assigned this week, you'll look at a similar thing happens in China in the late 70s. They switched to private property, yields increased by 5. And then there's like, since you have higher yields, less people need to work in farming, and you can move into, you can start to specialize. So this is like a critical institutional um, innovation where you just simply change the way you're doing farming and you get a lot more out of it. Now, what's interesting is why did this inefficient system persist for so long, this open field style communal system? So there's a lot of evidence suggesting that this system is less efficient, meaning it produces less, but the variance is lowered. Basically, essentially the variance of the yields are lower. The problem with a private property system is, if your crops fail, that's game over for you. Like your crops fail, all of a sudden you have nothing, you starve to death. So this kind of system is less efficient. Essentially, the average yields are much lower, but the variance, in terms of like if I'm on my own, I have a good year, I have a bad year. I may overall get more out of it, but this variance is higher. And so this system may have been better at like lowering the overall risk, which is why we don't know, but this is why people think it persisted for so long. Now, if you have some sort of system of, transferring from, people who have really, really high yields or having to those who have low yields, then you can sort of mitigate the variance that comes with a private property system. Essentially a welfare state is you just need some sort of, if you have this kind of, you're going to have this risky period, if you have some sort of way to take care of the people who through no fault of their own had bad yields, you can kind of have all the advantages. You can have the high outputs without the devastating risks. Okay. All right. So that kind of covers this. Oh, here we have just a nice picture of that switch to enclosure system. Okay, from 1797 to 1803. This is an area in England. This is what, kind of the open field system looks like. And then we switch to the enclosures. You can see it all divvied up into people's like small family farms. All right, plantations in a second.